My family faked. A reconciliation dinner after 3 years of no contact. 16 people. Lobster. A $400 wine. Dad said, "You're paying." I'd already spoken to the waiter. The check destroyed him. My father looked at me across a table covered in lobster shells and the wreckage of a $400 bottle of Bordeaux, folded his hands like a man about to close a deal he'd already won, and said 5 words loud enough for 16 people to hear. "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." My mother nodded. Aunt Linda reached for more butter. My sister Brooke, 3 glasses deep, smiled at me over the rim of her wine glass with the particular smile of someone who has been waiting all evening for this exact moment. And I said, "Let me go take care of things." Every single one of them exhaled. Here's the thing about working in restaurant operations for 11 years. I know exactly what a table like that costs before the check ever arrives. I can calculate the margin on a $62 entree while I'm still reading the menu. I know what a floor manager's body language looks like when a reservation has a note attached to it. I know the difference between a table that's celebrating and a table that's performing. And I had known, from the moment I walked through that door and saw 16 faces instead of 3, exactly what kind of table this was. So I had already handled things. I just hadn't told anyone yet. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning in March via text from my mother, Carol Ashworth, 61 years old, retired school administrator, woman who had not spoken to me in 3 years and 2 months, and by my count, 11 days. "Diana, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We'd like to start fresh. Dinner Saturday, just the 4 of us. You, me, Dad, and Brooke. Neutral ground. We miss you." I read it 4 times. Then I called my therapist, Dr. Nadia Reeves, 13 years in practice, specializing in family estrangement and narcissistic family systems, office in the Midtown building with the broken elevator that I'd been climbing 6 flights of stairs to reach for 2.5 years. She picked up on the second ring because I have the kind of relationship with my therapist where she knows when I'm calling from a parking lot. My mom texted. I said, "Tell me." I read it to her. A pause. "How do you feel?" "Like it's a trap," I said. "Why?" "Because the last time she suggested a fresh start, she CC'd my entire extended family on an email about my mental health struggles and suggested they all pray for me." I paused. "I'm not being paranoid. I have receipts." Dr. Reeves made the sound she makes when she's choosing her words with care. A small, considered exhale. "You don't have to go," she said. "But if you decide to, I want you to think about what you need to have in place before you walk through that door. Not to protect against something bad happening, just to know yourself in that room." I thought about it for 3 days. Then I replied to my mother, "Okay, Saturday works." What I did not say, "I know exactly who you are, and I've been paying attention for 34 years. Let me give you the landscape because it matters. I'm Diana Ashworth, 34. I've worked in restaurant and hospitality operations since I was 22, started as a floor manager at a mid-range chain, worked my way up, currently serve as director of operations for a regional restaurant group with 11 locations across 3 states. My job is logistics, margin, staff, systems. I am organized in the way that people become organized when chaos is what they grew up in, and order is what they built for themselves. My parents, Frank and Carol Ashworth, are the kind of people who are very well liked in the abstract. Frank is 63, retired now from a mid-level sales career, the kind of man who tells the same 4 stories at every gathering and laughs the loudest at his own punchlines. Carol organizes the church silent auction and remembers everyone's birthday, and has a gift for making people feel seen in the first 5 minutes of conversation that takes years to recognize as performance. My sister Brooke is 31. She has never held a job for longer than 18 months. She has borrowed money from our parents, and during the years I was still speaking to them, from me, with the casual frequency of someone who has never once been told no with any real consequences attached to it. The estrangement started 3 years ago over something that will sound small if I summarize it, and won't sound small if I explain it fully, so I'll land somewhere in the middle. My father asked me to co-sign a $40,000 personal loan for Brooke, not to lend her the money, to put my name and my credit on a legal document guaranteeing his daughter's debt. When I said no and explained why, she had defaulted on 2 previous debts, one of which had been a loan from me that I'd written off 3 years prior. My mother told me I was selfish. My father told me I'd always thought I was better than the family. And Brooke sent me a voice memo that I will not quote here, but that my attorney, Claire Hendricks of Hendricks Family Law, later described as aggressively emotionally abusive. I saved the voice memo. I save everything. I stopped returning calls after that. 2 years and 11 months of silence, broken by a Tuesday text about a fresh start and just the 4 of us. I should have known. I did know. I went anyway. The restaurant was called Maison Bureau, French-inspired white tablecloths, the kind of place that doesn't put prices on the menu they give you at the table, because if you have to ask, the thinking goes, you probably shouldn't be there. I know Maison Bureau well. I've consulted with their operations team twice, and their floor manager on weekends is a woman named Gwen Calloway, who I've known for 6 years from industry events. I arrived at 7:02 p.m., 2 minutes past the time my mother had specified, because I had been in the parking lot for 11 minutes doing the breathing exercises Dr. Reeves had given me for situations where I needed to be in my body before walking into a room. The host led me to a private dining room in the back. I heard them before I saw them. Laughter. Multiple voices. The particular elevated volume of a group that's been eating and drinking for a while, and is comfortable and warm, and doesn't know that anything is about to change. I stepped through the door. 16 people. table. 2 long tables pushed together. Lobster shells already on 3 plates. A bottle of red. I clocked it immediately, the label facing out. A 2018 Chateau Pichon Baron, which I knew from the restaurant's wine list, was $412. My uncle Gary and his wife Renata. My mother's sister Linda and her husband Don. 3 of Brooke's friends. People I'd met twice, maybe 3 times. My cousin Seth and his girlfriend. 4 people I didn't recognize at all. My father at the head of the table waving a credit card like a flag, telling the server to bring the good stuff. My mother, who turned when I walked in and gave me a smile so warm and practiced it could have been framed. Aunt Linda actually applauded. I stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. Then I smiled. I sat down. I ordered sparkling water, and I started calculating. Here's what I was doing while Aunt Linda told me I looked wonderful. And my cousin Seth asked about my job, and Brooke refilled her glass with the easy fluency of someone who has been here long enough to feel at home. I was running the numbers. 16 people. Based on what I could see already on the table and what I knew of the menu, 2 whole lobsters at $89 each, 3 orders of the Wagyu at $74. The 412 bottle already half gone with a second one clearly incoming. Appetizers, sides, desserts almost certainly coming. This table was going to land somewhere between $2,800 and $3,400 before tip. I know those numbers the way other people know what their mortgage costs, automatically, without trying. And here is what I also knew. My father does not order $400 wine. I know this because I spent 31 years in that house, and my father is a man who once returned a flannel shirt to LL Bean because the price tag had fallen off before he could confirm it was on sale. He is a man who considers the early bird special a moral good. He is a man who, at every family dinner of my childhood, received the check, squinted at it for an uncomfortable length of time, and then divided it in a way that always, somehow, worked out slightly in his favor. But there he was, performing solvency like a man who had rehearsed it. Something wasn't adding up. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe they'd come into money, that maybe this was genuinely a gesture, a real one, and I was so conditioned to look for the angle that I was inventing one where none existed. I told myself that for about 40 minutes. Then I excused myself to the restroom. The restrooms at Maison Barreau are down a short corridor off the main dining room. Marble floors, good lighting, the kind of restroom that suggests the owners understand that the experience doesn't stop at the table. There are 2 single occupancy rooms, both lockable. I pushed open the door to the first one. On the marble counter next to the sink, screen still lit, was a phone in a rose gold case. Brooks. I recognized the case. She'd had it for 2 years. A MagSafe one with a pop socket that said main character energy in small white letters, which is either deeply self-aware or deeply not, and I've never been sure which. I did not plan to look at it. What I planned to do was set it aside, use the restroom, wash my hands, and go back to the table. But the notification banner was visible from where I was standing. A group chat preview, white text on green, dinner plan, 3 members. The preview, don't tell Diana it's everyone. She won't dare. I picked up the phone. The full thread loaded. I read it in order. My mother, 8 days ago. Don't tell Diana it's everyone. Once she's there with the whole family watching, she won't dare say no. She never could handle a scene. My father, same day. Just make sure she sits at my end. I'll handle the ask. Brooke, 2 minutes after that. Order the good stuff before she gets there. Once it's on the table, she can't exactly send it back. Lowell. My mother again. That same night. It's not asking for money. It's letting her back into the family. She should be grateful we're even giving her this chance. My father, the next morning, and this is the one that made the tips of my fingers go cold. Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough. I read the thread twice. Then I set the phone back exactly where I'd found it. Screen down. Same angle. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Just a moment. Because this was not the time to feel things. This was the time to think clearly. And I thought about what Dr. Nadia Reeves had said before I walked into that room. Know what you need to have in place before you walk through that door. I turned off the faucet. I walked back out into the corridor. And instead of turning right toward the private dining room, I turned left toward the floor. Gwen Calloway was near the host stand reviewing something on a tablet. She'd been Maison Barreau's weekend floor manager for 4 years. Before that, she'd managed the front of house at 2 other restaurants in the city, one of which I'd worked with directly. We'd gotten coffee 3 times, sat on the same panel at a hospitality conference in 2022, texted occasionally about industry things. She looked up when she saw me, and her face did the thing faces do when someone appears from the wrong direction with a particular expression. Diana, not a question. I kept my voice low. 2 sentences, the way I'd been rehearsing since the parking lot. I'm not the host for the private room, and I won't be covering that table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head, the one whose card is on file for the reservation. Gwen looked at me for exactly 1 second. She nodded once. No questions. No raised eyebrows. She turned back to her tablet. That's the thing about people who've worked in this industry long enough. They've seen every version of every family dinner. They know which silence to honor. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my sparkling water, and I waited. The next hour was the most sustained piece of theater I have ever sat through. And I once attended a 3-hour experimental opera where nothing happened for 40 minutes in the middle. My father was magnificent in the role he'd written himself. Generous, expansive, kept catching my eye across the table with warm, meaningful glances. The glances of a man re-welcoming his prodigal daughter. The subtext of which was, look how forgiving I am. Look how much I love you. Look at what I'm spending. My mother asked me careful questions about my work with the interested, attentive manner of a woman who has decided she's interested in you again and sees no reason why you shouldn't respond accordingly. Aunt Linda told me 3 times that I looked wonderful. Brooke, who was on glass number 3 by the time the entrees were cleared, leaned across the table at one point and said, with the particular looseness calmness of someone who's been drinking and thinks the hard part is already handled. Relax, big sis, you can afford it. I looked at her, smiled, said nothing. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. The thing about knowing what's coming is that it changes the texture of waiting for it. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't rehearsing what to say. I was just present. The way you're present during a fire drill you know is a drill. Calm, observing, taking notes. I noticed my father had refilled his own wine glass twice, but offered to refill mine and my mother's first both times. A performance of manners. I noticed my mother had touched my arm 3 times in 45 minutes, each touch at a moment of laughter, the kind of casual physical warmth that costs nothing and implies everything. I noticed Brooke had taken a photo of the table and posted it to her Instagram story with the caption "family dinner" before the entrees arrived, which meant documentation existed before I'd touched a single item on that table. I filed all of it away. Dessert menus came. 3 people ordered the chocolate souffle at $22 each. 2 got the cheese course. The second bottle of Hichon Baron was nearly gone. Then my father cleared his throat, folded his hands, gave me the warm smile he reserves for bank meetings and moments when he needs to seem reasonable. "You're paying, right?" Loud enough for the whole room. The room he'd filled. The room he'd designed. "You owe us that much." 16 people heard it. My mother nodded. Aunt Linda reached for more butter. Brooke's smile arrived like something she'd been holding in her pocket all evening. I set my water glass down. "Let me go take care of things," I said, and every single one of them exhaled. I walked to the far end of the corridor and I stood there for 4 minutes. Not because I needed to do anything. Everything had already been done. I stood there because I needed those 4 minutes to be somewhere quiet, in my own body, before I went back into that room and watched what happened next. I thought about the first time my father asked me for money. I was 26, just gotten my first real operation salary. Not impressive by any measure, but stable, and mine. He needed $3,000 to cover an overdraft, just until the pension adjustment kicks in. He paid it back in 4 months, which at the time I thought meant something. I thought about the loan cosign request 3 years ago, the voice memo Brooke sent, the email my mother CC'd to 37 people. I thought about sitting in Dr. Reeves's office 18 months ago, in the chair closest to the window, telling her that the thing I felt most was not anger, not grief. The thing I felt most was the particular exhaustion of being wrong about people over and over and not understanding why you kept being wrong until you finally understood that you had needed them to be different than they were, and that need had been doing the seeing for you. "When did you stop needing them to be different?" she'd ask. "When I realized they were always going to be exactly this," I said. I looked at the time on my phone. 9:41 p.m. I walked back to the private dining room. I sat down at 9:41. The conversation around me resumed in the easy, winding way of a dinner in its final stages. People leaning back, coffee cups appearing, the relaxed atmosphere of people who believe the hard thing is over and now it's just warmth and getting home. At 9:51, the server, a young man named Tyler, who I had watched work that floor with the competent, unflappable efficiency of someone who takes their job seriously, appeared at the end of the table. He set the leather check presenter down in front of my father. The table went quiet, not immediately, not the way things go quiet. In a wave, one person noticing and falling silent, then the next, until the silence reaches the far end, and Aunt Linda stops mid-sentence about something involving her garden, and looks at the check presenter, and then at my father, and then at me, and then back at my father. My father stared at the leather folder. He looked at Tyler. Tyler's expression was professionally neutral. My father opened the folder. He did not look at the total. He physically could not in front of 16 people, not without giving himself away. So he did what people do when they're buying time. He made a show of reviewing it, scanning the items, nodding slightly, as if confirming things were in order. Then he looked at me, and in his eyes was a calculation, very fast, almost imperceptible, the kind your face does before your brain has finished the sentence. He was deciding whether to make a scene, whether to say something, whether to look at me the way he wanted to look at me or the way 16 people were watching him look at me. He chose 16 people. "I've got it," he said. The same 2-finger flourish with the card. Performed confidence, muscle memory. Tyler took the card. The table re-exhaled. Conversation resumed. Quieter now. People pulling on coats, checking phones. The comfortable winding down energy of a dinner that is nearly over. Tyler returned in 4 minutes. He set the card back on the table in front of my father. "I'm sorry, sir. The card's been declined." A silence. My father's smile held for exactly 1 more second. Then it went out, the way a screen goes dark, not gradually, just off. "Try it again," he said, lower. The tone of a man choosing not to panic in public by sheer force of will. "We did run it twice, sir." Another card came out of my father's wallet. The burgundy one, his backup, the one he kept for emergencies. Tyler went and came back. "I'm sorry, sir." Also declined. The table was very quiet now. A third card, an older one, creased at the corner. My father's hand, I noticed, was not quite steady. Tyler returned. Same answer. The check was $3,140 before tip. I knew this because I'd asked Gwen on my way back from the corridor what the running total was, and she told me, and I had stood there for a moment with that number in my mind and thought about what $3,140 worth of performed solvency looks like when the cards are declined. My father looked at me, the way you look at a lifeboat that's already pushed off from the dock. "You were supposed to," he started. He stopped himself, but the sentence was already in the room, unfinished, hanging in the air in front of Aunt Linda and Uncle Gary and Brooke's friends and my cousin Seth and 4 people I didn't know and everyone else who had gathered here tonight at my father's design. "You were supposed to." Every person at that table heard it, and every person at that table understood in that moment what it meant. Not a slip, an admission. The architecture of the evening made suddenly, undeniably visible. The private room, the ordered wine, the gathered family, the warm toast, the ask, you were supposed to, the whole structure, in 5 unfinished words. I know, Dad, I said, quietly. No performance, just the fact of it. That's exactly the problem. I stood up, picked up my purse, and I walked out of that private dining room past 16 people who had just learned that the machine was out of order. I called Dr. Reeves from the parking lot at 10:03 p.m. She didn't answer. It was a Thursday night, past 10. I didn't expect her to. But I left a voicemail that said, I'm okay. I need to talk this week. I have a lot to tell you. Then I sat in my car for a while. Not because I was devastated. Not because I was shaking. I was doing the thing I do after high-stress situations where I've held it together. I was letting my body catch up to the fact that it was over. Releasing the breath I'd been holding in increments all evening. My phone lit up at 10:17. Brooke, what did you do? My mother, 10:19. Diana, call me right now. My father, 10:31. After the others. A single text that said, we need to talk. I turned my phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. The next morning, I called Claire Hendricks at Hendricks Family Law. Claire has been practicing family law for 16 years, specifically cases involving financial coercion, undue influence, and what she describes as financial enmeshment in family systems. She's sharp and direct and has no patience for the kind of slow-motion documentation of grievances that some clients need years to assemble. I, as it happens, had already assembled mine. Tell me what happened, she said. I told her. All of it. The 3 years of no contact, the Tuesday text, the private room and the 16 people and the $3,140 check, and my father's 3 declined cards and the 5 unfinished words. And before all of this, she said, the loan cosign request, the voice memo from your sister. I still have the voice memo, I said. A pause. You have documentation of the cosign request? Email chain. Dated. My responses are in there. I'd kept them in a folder on my desktop labeled Family Administrative, which is the folder name I use when I need the act of filing something to feel less emotionally significant than it is. I also have the texts from last night. My mother's phone was in the restroom and the preview was visible, so I read the thread and took a mental note of the content. I don't have a screenshot. You don't need one, Claire said. What you have is a documented pattern. What happened last night is consistent with it. She was quiet for a moment. I want to write a letter. Nothing aggressive. I'm not recommending legal action unless they escalate, but a clear, documented communication that establishes your position and creates a paper trail. What position? That you are aware of the pattern, that you have documentation of the pattern, and that any further contact that includes financial requests, manipulation, or coercion will be handled accordingly. A pause. It changes the calculation on their end. People who operate this way rely on there being no consequences. A letter from an attorney establishes that consequences are now possible. Claire sent the letter 8 days later. My father called twice after receiving it. Both times, I let it go to voicemail. The voicemails were not what I expected. There was no anger, no accusation, no version of we'll fight this. The first one was short and confused sounding, as if the letter had rearranged something in his understanding of how this situation worked. The second one was longer. He talked about the dinner, not about what he'd done, but about how it had gone wrong, as if it were an event that had misfired rather than a plan that had been executed and met with a response he hadn't accounted for. He did not apologize. I didn't expect him to. But he sounded for the first time in my memory like a man who had discovered that the world had an edge he hadn't known was there. I showed Dr. Reeves the voicemails at our session the following Tuesday. She listened to both. Then she looked at me with the particular expression she uses when she's going to say something she's been building toward for a while. How do you feel? She asked. Not how I expected to feel, I said. What did you expect? I thought about it. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. Something cleaner. And instead, tired, I said. Sad. Not for what happened last week. For what it took me this long to understand. I looked at the window. They were always this. The dinner wasn't a new thing. It was just the first time I was in the room and didn't pay for it. She nodded. What does it mean? She said carefully. That you went anyway. I thought about that for a long time. I think I needed to see it clearly, I said finally. I'd spent 3 years telling myself I knew who they were, but I needed to be in the room. I needed to watch it happen, see it with my own eyes, and be the person who had already handled it before they even asked. I paused. I think I needed to know that I could be in that room and be fine. And were you? Yes, I said, and I meant it. It's September. My father and mother have not made contact since Claire's letter, which is 4 months of silence, shorter than my last stretch, longer than I expected. Brooke sent me a Facebook message in July that I read and did not respond to. It was not an apology. It was a message written in the language of someone who expects that enough time passing should function as one. I have continued seeing Dr. Reeves on Tuesday mornings. I have continued in my role as Director of Operations, which in the past 6 months has included opening 2 new locations, navigating a supply chain situation that I will not describe here because it would take another 5,000 words, and mentoring a 24-year-old assistant manager named Kelly, who is frighteningly good at her job and reminds me somewhat of myself at that age, which is both gratifying and slightly alarming. I had dinner with Gwen Calloway last month, not at Maison Barreau, at a Thai place she likes in her neighborhood. We talked about the restaurant industry, about management, about the specific art of staying calm in rooms where other people are not. She told me that the floor manager who handled the table after I left had managed the situation. 3 declined cards, 1 increasingly distressed guest, 15 bewildered onlookers, with total professionalism. They'd worked something out. She didn't tell me what. I didn't ask.